Chapter 36, Tuesday, December 3rd to Friday, December 13th, 1776. Our private soldiers in your hands are treated in a manner shocking to humanity, and that many of them must have perished through hunger had it not been for the charitable contributions of the inhabitants. General George Washington complaining to British General William Howe. Lady Seymour was struck by a fever whilst visiting up in Greenwich. She had to be carried to her chamber, her skin the color of an old beeswax candle. Dr. Dustage came to bleed her so that her bodily humors would go back into balance. When the bleeding was over, Madame saw the doctor to the door. I was dusting the grandfather clock in the front hall. Good sir, Madame said in a low voice, I wonder. I believe our aunt would fast recover at our estate in Charleston. She could sit in the sun for hours and breathe the healthful air. Don't you agree? The doctor's bushy eyebrows flew up in alarm. South Carolina is hundreds of miles from here, over bad roads. Lady Seymour would be dead by Philadelphia. Which was likely Madame's intention, I thought. The doctor pulled on his gloves and picked up his bag. I doubt she'll be well enough to travel until spring. I will call again tomorrow. He tipped his hat. Good day, madam. Lady Seymour's bell rang upstairs as the door closed behind him. Madame squeezed her lips together so tight I thought she had bit them off. Girl, she spat, go see what she wants. By supper had been decided that I would tend Lady Seymour whilst she was bedridden. The master used his connections in the British High Command to secure extra firewood for the house, declaring that his aunt's bedchamber be kept as warm as the month of June. The heat of the room helped to bake out the fever in Lady Seymour's blood and ease her cough. 'Twas warm enough that I could go about in stocking feet, which was a comfort, for my shoes had taken to pinching my toes something wicked. As she recovered, the lady took to reading all of the newspapers printed in the city. Whenever she dropped off to sleep, I would steal as many sentences as I could. Thusly, I followed the progress of the war, what was left of it. The flame of independence was sputtering and expected to burn out any day. The rebels had run out of ammunition, soldiers, and money. Mayor Matthews, him who plotted to kill General Washington, escaped from rebel prison and returned to New York in triumph. The American Congress, frightened by the marching British, fled to Philadelphia and ran to Baltimore. Newport, in my home state of Rhode Island, fell to the British too. When I read that last little bit of news, I was stunned. I had not spared a thought for Rhode Island for months. 'Twas several days before I could again sneak up to the Bridwell, toting sausages, crusts, and cheese rinds. The guard stole a few of the sausages and gave me only a few moments to conversate. It mattered not. Curzon was not feeling up to much talk. I sat on the stone floor and checked the hole in his leg. It was hot but free of yellow pus. Conditions in the prison had eased some. Folk in town had donated enough blankets that there was one to be shared between every 2 or 3 men. The British promised each prisoner would receive 2 pounds of pork and hardtack biscuit every week. They did not announce that the pork was often spoiled, nor that the men had to eat it raw, for there was no fire to cook it over. For my next visit, I saved my own helping of mince pie. I filled the bucket with potato scraps and mutton fat and put the pie on top. The guard took the pie as I had hoped. I loves me a good mince pie, he said as he unlocked the door to the prison. Pie crumbs spilling from his mouth. Frozen bodies were stacked in the hall, waiting to be buried in the pits. The clothes had been taken from the bodies to keep the living soldiers warmer. I kept my eyes on the ground out of modesty. Curzon was still not in the mood for conversating, not even a little bit. I thought he looked feverish, but when I went to feel his forehead, he pushed my hand away. The men snickered at that. I took my empty bucket and left. Snow fell all that night. Lady Seymour prepared an errand list for me the next afternoon. She had spent the morning a-gazing into the fire and had not taken any food. I made bold and suggested that she eat a biscuit with honey for her own good. I need strength to get through the winter, she added. She set down her pen, picked up her teacup, and sipped the hot cinnamon water. I thought it pleased you when I left so much on my plate. Ma'am, the more I leave behind, the more there is for you to take to the prison. She studied me so close I thought she could see my thoughts. That is where you've been taking the table scraps, isn't it? My head bobbed once, like a puppet's. Am I to assume you know someone confined there? I found my voice. Yes, ma'am? She sipped again and looked at me over the rim of her teacup. It is an honorable. It is honorable to help a friend in need. How did you know? I blurted out. She folded the sheet of paper on the table. These are the items I would like you to fetch for me. Purchase the ink and newspaper at Riverton's, but not the books. He overcharges. Go to that shop near the baker on Hanover Square. Elihu said they haven't closed. I bobbed once and took the paper. Please, ma'am? I tried again. How did you know? Her gaze returned to the logs in the hearth. Take care how you go, Isabel, for many people think it is a fine and Christian thing to help the prisoners. I do not think my niece is one of them. Yes, ma'am, I whispered. It started to snow whilst I was in Riverton's. The wind blew the snow direct into my face as I crossed the square, and I was grateful to step into the shelter of the stationer's store, for 'twas warm and dry inside, near peaceful, if such a word can be used to describe a shop. A jelly-bellied officer with thick spectacles was purchasing a tall stack of books from a man behind the counter. They were deep in their talk and appeared not to notice me. I took a slow turn around the shop, admiring the shelves heavy with books, business forms, proclamations from Parliament and General Howe, slates, thick paper, quills, and sealing wax. The books called to me. My fingers itched to touch them. It had been months since I dug into the story of Robinson Crusoe. I glanced towards the counter. The men were arguing, friendly like, about a fellow named Hume. They both had their faces planted in the same pamphlet. When I trod on a squeaky board, they did not even look up. I reached up to a bookshelf and flipped my way through the books standing at attention. The titles were near as long as the books themselves. Treatise on the Propagation of Sheep, The Manufacture of Wool, and the Cultivation and Manufacture of Flax by John Wiley, or Cato Major, or His Discourse of Old Age with Explanatory Notes by M.T. Cicero, or Poems on Various Subjects, Religious and Moral by Phyllis Wheatley, and countless tracts containing sermons and advice. My fingers backed up. Mama told me about Miss Wheatley. She was kidnapped in Africa, sold in Boston, and wrote fancy poetry that smart people liked. She had visited London and England. She had been an enslaved girl but was a free woman. I took the slim book off the shelf and opened the cover. I had never read a poem. What if I lacked the skill? What if I were caught? Might as well throw myself in the river. Bang! The closing door startled me, so I near dropped the volume. I quickly set it back on the shelf and approached the counter. Can I help you? Said a young man who stood behind it. Yes, please, sir. I handed him the list. From the Lady Seymour. I hear she is poorly, he said as he looked over the list. Yes, sir. But she is strong enough to sit by the fire now and has a powerful urge to read. He nodded. She's a good customer. I'm glad she's on the mend. He quickly assembled everything on the list. The letters of the Lady Mary Wortley Montagu, History of the Roman Republic, Volume 1, and The Expedition of Humphrey Clinker, and pulled out a large sheet of paper to wrap them in. As he worked the scissors, he paused. You knew that boy, didn't you? Pardon me? He continued cutting. Bellingham's boy. Red hat. Quick talker. He creased the paper with his fingers. He brought you here once, in May. Pointed to you out the window. Convinced me to hand over 2 fresh baked rolls. Told me you were like to die from hunger if I didn't help. He smiled at the memory. I'm sorry, sir, I said. I didn't mean to take your food. He pulled off a length of twine. You didn't. One of the advantages of courting the baker's daughter is all the bread a man can eat. He had not yet commented on my looking at the books. I feared he might try and trip me up, get me to say something I ought not, but saw no other choice than to be polite. I hope your lady is well, sir, I said. He concentrated on tying a bow. So do I. She fled with her father to a village in Pennsylvania, a place called Hatboro. They make hats there. Clever, don't you think? He tried to smile, but his eyes were downcast and melancholy. Perhaps 'tis safer there, I said. Aye, he said, finishing the bow, with plenty of young men eager to protect her. But that's a tale for another day. He kept the package in his hands, lost in thought. Master Lockton will settle his aunt's account at the end of the week, I said. Oh, aye. He gave me the package and waited as I settled it in my basket. I hear tell you're one of them who feeds the lads in the Bridwell. A sizzling log in the hearth popped suddenly, and I jumped. Not me, sir. Begging pardon, but someone is mistaken. He crossed his arms over his chest and shook his head. That there mark on your face makes you hard to forget, lass. The heat from the hearth filled the room and made it hard to breathe. My eyes darted to the windows, and I fought the urge to run. I felt like all of New York was watching me. I leaned forward, put my elbows on the counter, and lowered his voice. We were the only people in the shop. You tell those boys in jail to hang on. There's plenty of us out here trying to help. He removed a slim volume from under the counter. This is for you. Don't let your mistress see it. I cannot read, sir, I lied. He snorted once as he quickly wrapped the book. Of course you can't. He pushed the package to my side of the counter. All who love liberty should commit the words to heart. I can't take it, I started. I cannot pay. I only have a few left, and those I should burn, he said with a wave of his hand. Read it, pass it on, and keep feeding the lads. I bobbed once and hid the parcel in my pocket under my apron. As soon as I could stand close enough to a fire, I'd get rid of it. The last thing I needed was more trouble on account of independence. Yes, sir, I said, hurrying for the door. Thank you, sir. He raised his fingers to his lips in a last warning. Shh. Chapter 37. Saturday, December 14th to Monday, December 23rd, 1776. The distress of the prisoners cannot be communicated in words. 20 or 30 die every day. They lie in heaps unburied. What numbers of my countrymen have died by cold and hunger, perished for want of the common necessaries of life? I have seen it. This, sir, is the boasted British clemency. Letter written from New York describing prisoners captured at Fort Washington. Lady Seymour regained her strength by the day. I was no longer allowed to spend warm hours in her bedchamber. She took her breakfast and dinner alone, but joined the rest of the company for supper each night. Madame was saddened by her husband's aunt's return to health. The next week in the kitchen storm of flour and sugar for Christmas was fast approaching. Madame's list of required delicacies was endless. Gingerbread, pies of brandied peaches and preserved cherries and mincemeat, macaroons, blancmange, Jordan almonds, sugar candy, as many kinds of cakes as there were fingers on both hands. I was the dog's body in charge of keeping the oven stoked with wood and ashes cleared out, fetching forgotten ingredients from the market and beating eggs 10 at a time till my arm was near to fall off. Two of the soldiers' wives got into a terrible squabble the day the woodpile froze. Hannah told Mary it was her turn to fetch home the buckets from the tea-water pump, and Mary says 'twas Hannah's turn. Back and forth they went. The words got hotter as their tempers grew shorter. I went yesterday, Mary said loudly as she poured boiling water into the basin. You know for a fact, because you told me my nose was the color of a cherry when I came in. Hannah shook her head as she scrubbed the floor. No, no, no. That was 2 days ago. Yesterday I slipped in ice and fell on my backside. Near broke my tailbone, I did. Could barely come up the steps this morning. You're a lying codfish, you are, Mary said. Hannah threw the brush in the bucket and water splashed on the floor. Who you callin' liar? Sarah, the boss lady, came through the door just as Mary rounded the table, her hands balled up into fists. Sarah was getting close to her time and had a bit of a temper herself. She slammed the door so hard that the whole house shook. Shut your gobs, she shouted. I'll report the pair of you to the colonel if you don't straighten up. There'll be no more brawling or caterwauling in this kitchen. But, they both said. Sarah glared such a glare at the pair of them, I thought their hair would catch fire. And suddenly I saw a way clear to my own purposes. Beggin' pardon, Miss Sarah, ma'am, I said meekly. What do you want? She said, her eyes still on the other women. I can fetch the tea water, I volunteered. Mary shook her head back and forth. Oh, no, she won't. She'll tear out those shops to go get out of her own chores. Make one of the men do it, I say. I'm the first to awake up to build the fires, I explained. The shops are still closed then. I'll dash up to the pump and be back before the sun comes up. Sarah gave me a suspicious look. Why would you take on extra work, special with it being so cold and dark in the morning? I was raised in the country, miss. Too much time inside makes me feel poorly. I like walking in the fresh air, even if it's cold. 'Twas mostly a lie, but the tea-water pump was right close to the prison. Fetching water would give me a chance to check on Curzon every day. Hannah picked up her scrub brush and knelt on the floor again. Let her go, I say. It saves us the trouble of freezing our tails off. She dipped the brush into the bucket. Don't know what possessed me to follow my Jimmy to this God-forsaken colony. The next morning found me headed headed up island long before the sun rose. When I knocked on the guardhouse door of the prison, it was opened by a soldier I'd never seen before. A short man with black hair, sky blue eyes, and a scowl. "You can't come in," he said after I explained my errand. "Regulations have been changed." "Tell her about the windows," called another soldier, warming himself by the fire. "The regulations permit civilians to deliver food and sundry provisions." "But not firewood," added the man at the hearth, yawning. "But not firewood," repeated the first man. "There will be regular patrols round the perimeter of the building to ensure the civilians do not tarry overlong in conversation with the prisoners." "We'll be checking on the grub you've given 'em," said his companion. "Guards will inspect all civilian donations," the first man said formally. "If you deliver contraband items, you will be imprisoned yourself." I shivered once. "Are scones and jam contraband?" "Not yet." Back outside, I walked around the front of the building, trying to figure where Curzon's cell lay. Some prisoners were already awake, their hands and arms wrapped in rags sticking through the bars of the window. Curzon's cell lay to the back of the building. I rounded the corner and stopped. This was where the burial pits were dug. The pits were just a little smaller than the cells, dug down the height of a grown man. One of them had already been filled with bodies and covered again with dark mud. Two lay open and empty, sprinkled with snow like sugar on a cake. I did not know how many bodies would fit in each. I shivered again and pulled my cloak tight, then turned my back to the graves and counted the windows. 2, 3, 4, until I came to the window I hoped led to Curzon's cell. The eastern sky had brightened enough for me to see all around, but inside of the prison was dark. I stepped up to the window. The bottom of the window was just above the top of my head. I stood on tiptoe and stretched my hand up to the bar. "Hello?" I called in a hushed voice. "Curzon? Anyone?" The nasty fellow who had tried to steal my bucket on the first visit, Dibdin, leaned his face against the bars. He had a blanket around his shoulders and Curzon's hat upon his head. "Won't let you in no more, eh?" "They changed the rules. Can you fetch my brother, please, sir? He's sleeping." I wanted to pull the bars apart, snatch the hat from his head, and thrash him with my fists and shoes, but that was impossible. I forced honey into my voice and a humble tone. "Well then, may I please speak to your sergeant?" "Sarge is dead." He turned his head and spat. "I'm in charge now. I'll take the victuals you brought." I started to reach into the bucket to hand the scones through the bars, but stopped. "How do I know my brother's not dead too? Wake him up, please." Dibdin opened his mouth, but closed it without a word. His hunger was stronger than his temper, it seemed. He turned to someone in the cell. "Get the black boy over here." A moment later, Curzon appeared at the window. He was shaking so badly he could barely stand, his eyes half closed, teeth chattering. He had no blanket around him, and there were puke stains on the front of his shirt. His gold earrings were missing, too. "Curzon! Curzon!" I hissed. "What ails you? What can I do?" He did not hear me, or could not. He was insensible of his own name and where he was. Dibdin joined Curzon at the window. "Terrible, ain't it? How fevers and pox tear through this place." There was hollow laughter in the cell. "Give him his hat back," I said, "and a blanket. Is he getting his rations?" He did not answer me. That was an answer in itself. The prison was not a place of shared hardship anymore. It was a hole of desperation. "You bloody beast," I swore. "How dare you let him starve?" The words flew out of my mouth without pause. "Who are you to reprimand me, girl?" he snarled, putting his face up to the bars. His breath stank of rotting teeth, and snot pooled at the edges of his nostrils. "He's a slave. He will not be treated the same as a free man." He wiped his nose with the back of his hand. "But you can remedy that," he said, "with ease." I tried to keep my voice steady. "How so?" Curzon was seized by a fit of coughing so violent I feared his ribs would crack. He choked on his own spittle and fought for breath, then finally relaxed back into his stupor, leaning against the window. Dibdin glanced back at the other men in the cell before continuing. "Our Captain Morse is on parole, lodged at Golden Hill Tavern, we hear. Go there. Tell him the men have fever and pox. One of our lads, Bridgebane, has a father in Picastaway with money and influence. If the captain can get word to him, Bridgebane's father could arrange for a proper physician to attend us here." Curzon coughed again and moaned. Sweat glistened on his forehead. "And the doctor would see to my brother?" I said. Dibdin hesitated, then gave a nod. "Aye." "And he gets a blanket and food?" Dibdin said something to a man I couldn't see. A blanket appeared on Curzon's shoulders. Curzon clutched it around himself. "And his hat." My voice was ice. Dibdin removed the hat and placed it on Curzon's head. "Lay him down," he instructed. On the rushes, not the bare floor. Someone helped Curzon from the window. I had no choice. I handed the jam-covered burnt scones up to the window. Dibdin stuck the first one in his mouth, then passed the others to the men, who suddenly crowded the window. If he dies, you'll not see me again, I warned. Understood, he said. I found Captain Morse carrying out rubbish for the tavern keeper. He was a well-fed man wearing the brown coat trimmed with white that signified he was a prisoner of war. There was a big gap between his front teeth, but they looked clean enough. He joined me in the shadows of the alley and listened as I quickly explained my mission. I'll try to get word to Bridgebane's family tonight. It is against all the laws of war to treat prisoners so badly. He paced angrily. How often can you stop here? Every morning. Good. Tell Dibdin I'll see what I can do to ease their sufferings, though I fear it will not be enough. My brother is among the prisoners, I said. He's ill. Can I see to it that he's given his share of whatever Bridgebane provides? I surely will. Your brother was calm and brave during the final battle. He's a true soldier. The crow of a rooster interrupted him. The sun was fighting through the leaden clouds. I picked up the buckets. I have to hurry. He nodded. Thank you for your help. My apologies, but I do not know your name. I am called Sal. Do you carry a last name as well, Sal? I hesitated. According to Madam, my surname was Lockton, but it tasted foul in my mouth. I shook my head. He smiled. Just Sal, then. Good day to you, Just Sal. Lucky for me, the overcast morn caused the other servants to sleep past their normal time. By the time Hannah and Mary staggered up from the cellar, I had the porridge bubbling on the tea and the tea steeping. I could not eat nor drink a thing, for my belly was tied up with fear. My thoughts chased round and round my brain pan. I could not visit the prison daily. I was sure to be caught and punished, but I had to visit the prison daily. Curzon's life depended on it. But someone would see me and was sure to remember the mark on my face. Word would get back to Madam, and she would tell Colonel Hawkins, and he would set someone to follow me, and Captain Morse would be flogged for passing on messages, and the prisoners in Curzon's cell would all be hung and buried in the pit. When I thought what they might do to me, I ran to the necessary and had me a good puking. But the next day, I made my way up there again, food for the prisoners, water for the Locktons, and every once in a while a message to the gap-toothed man in the brown coat at the Golden Hill Tavern. A few nights later, there was a terrible hubbubaloo between Madam and the master when he announced at supper that he was planning to travel on the next ship to London. He would carry messages to Parliament, conduct his own business, and likely to return to New York by the summer. Madam was not pleased. First, she argued that he ought not go. Then she argued, yes, he should go, and he should take her with him. When he refused, she threw a goblet in the fireplace and carried on so loudly that the master and Colonel Hawkins finally called for the carriage and left for a tavern. Madam dosed herself with strong wine after that and went to bed. That night, the temperatures fell so far below freezing that the biggest fire could not keep away the chill. I moved my pallet as close to the hearth as I dared, and sat with all my clothes, my cloak, and my blanket wrapped around me. 'Twas so cold I could not sleep. General Washington and his men were holed up in Morristown. Folks said that they were in desperate need of stockings and food. I could scarce credit how hungry men with frozen feet could win a war. They were fools for even trying. I waited at the clock as the clock first chimed 11 times, then 12, watching the firelight and trying not to ponder. When I got up to add wood to the fire, my feet wandered themselves to the pantry, and my hands pulled the loose board there. Under the board there were some sheets of newsprint I had saved, the lead piece from the statue of King George, my seeds, and the book given me by the stationer. I carried the book to my warm pallet and quietly untied the twine and removed the paper wrapping. I opened the cover. A fellow named Thomas Paine wrote the little book. He called it Common Sense. Mama always said that common sense was far from common. That's why it was so special when you found it. The first sentence in the book did not seem to contain any. Some writers have so confounded society with government as to leave little or no distinction between them, whereas they are not only different, but have different origins. Society is produced by our wants, and government by our wickedness. It took 4 readings to figure out the meaning, which I took to be that the life of folks is different than the world, what rules over them. Paine sure did dance a long time with the notion before he said it. I closed the book and longed for Robinson Crusoe, still stranded in the study where Colonel Hawkins was asleep. I dared not rescue him. I opened the book again and attacked the next sentence.